Welcome to the deep dive workshop on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, a new paradigm in Asia's trading architecture. My name is Sanchita, economist with the Economic Research Department of ADB. I'm your host for the next 2 hours. The workshop is divided in 2 parts. The first part comprises of 2 presentations on what we know about RCEP so far. The presentations are followed by a panel discussion on the upsides and the challenges that our stakeholders foresee as the agreement comes into practice. The overall objective of the workshop is to generate awareness about the agreement among the private sector and national government agencies that are responsible for implementing the agreed commitments. To kickstart the workshop, we have with us Dr. Albert Park, ADB's Chief Economist and Director General of the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department, to give the opening remarks. I will not go into the details of his bio, but for short introduction, I'll say that Mr. Albert Park has extensive experience in academia, policy think tanks, and international organizations across Asia-Pacific countries. His interest spans a broad range of development issues covering poverty, inequality, migration, labor markets, foreign investment, and others. Without further ado, Albert, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Sanchita, and welcome to all of the distinguished guest participants and colleagues. We're very happy that you can join us in today's conversation about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP agreement. As you know, this agreement includes 15 countries, including all of the ASEAN countries, as well as 5 other countries, and was implemented, the implementation began in most of the countries on January 1st of this year. I want to congratulate ASEAN for this great achievement, because it really was ASEAN that led the negotiation of the agreement among its own members, but then with the individual countries. And it builds upon, of course, ASEAN's own efforts at internal economic integration in the ASEAN Economic Community and bilateral free trade agreements it had already negotiated with some of the partner countries. The passage of RCEP and its implementation is very timely. As we know, economies are still struggling to recover from the pandemic, and we think that RCEP can contribute to productive efforts to rebuild economies in the region. The agreement also has the potential to strengthen supply chains internally in the region and enhance sustainability as it strengthens regional integration, both with respect to the typical trade issues related to investment and trade activity, but also with a focus as well on regulatory coherence to promote a better business environment. At the same time, RCEP still is very much a work in progress. It's a work in progress, first because there are still a lot of implementation issues that different national governments are dealing with and will need time to implement effectively. The agreement itself also offers scope for future changes, both through built-in agendas and opportunities for technical cooperation. And of course, we know it welcomes new members to join the RCEP agreement. RCEP also has proposed that there will be an independent, separate secretariat to monitor implementation. At the ADB, we've been spending quite a lot of effort undertaking analytical research on the RCEP agreement. We think it's important for the region. We've been authoring working papers, technical reports, policy briefs, and both on the agreement as a whole and on more narrower issues related to the agreement, such as market access, service sector liberalization, e-commerce, et cetera. Soon, we're going to be publishing another technical report focusing on a summary of each of the chapters of the agreement, comparing them to some of the other key agreements globally, such as the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership and the WTO. We also look forward to working with national governments to support their capacity to both implement the agreement and really fully take advantage of its provisions. We really hope it can engage private sector activity so as to drive global economic change and growth. So I think you'll find that today's event is really a preview of this conversation and discussion that we're going to have for some time to come as the agreement evolves and becomes increasingly implemented. We've assembled a group of our own research team, but also panelists from very different backgrounds, negotiators, researchers, private sector people, to share their perspectives on different aspects of the agreement. So I hope you'll benefit and learn a lot from the discussion. I'm certainly looking forward to it myself. So welcome again, and back to you, Sanchita.
Thank you, Albert, for sharing the positive sentiment about the agreement. Moving to the next segment of our workshop, let me welcome Dr. Cyn-Young Park to share her thoughts on the RCEP agreement and its impact on Asia Pacific countries. Ms. Cyn-Young Park is Director of the Regional Cooperation and Integration Division in the Economic Research Department of ADB. She leads several flagship publications in ADB, including the Asia Economic Integration Report, Asia Pacific Regional Cooperation and Integration Index, and participates in several regional and global policy forums. She is currently leading the RCEP knowledge work in ADB. Over to you, Cyn-Young.
Thank you, Sanchita. Can we have the slide up? This is based on our earlier study. This paper has been co-authored with Professor Peter Patry and then Mike Plummer in the United States. Well, next slide, please. RCEP offers a critical momentum to rebuild the rule-based and the multilateral global trade system. It can also act as a catalyst to deepen regional trade and supply chains and support economic recovery during and after the pandemic. RCEP was signed on 15th November 2020 among 15 members, and it has entered into force on January 1st of this year. RCEP is certainly the largest trading bloc among these 15 member economies, accounting for about 30% of the global GDP and global population. There are several important characteristics of this RCEP agreement. This is a living agreement. It is open for accession by any new economy 18 months after its entry into force. It also offers a single rulebook to help facilitate the development and expansion of regional supply chains among the participating members. It has embedded considerable flexibility and special provisions for different treatment, especially for low-income economies in the region. And it has a provision to provide the technical cooperation and capacity building, and also has a different enforcement timeline to ensure that the economies with the different levels of the development can all benefit from the agreement. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Well, the RCEP has is quite comprehensive in terms of its coverage. It comprises 20 chapters and includes many areas that are not previously covered in the ASEAN Plus One FTAs. The specific provisions covering trade in goods will include cumulative rules of origin, customs procedures, trade facilitation, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, standards, technical regulation, and conformity assessment enforce procedures, and trade remedies. Specific provisions in trade in services include financials, telecommunication and professional services, as well as the temporary movement of natural persons. And also, there are chapters on investment, intellectual property, the electronic commerce and competition, and small and medium enterprises, economic technical cooperation, government procurement, and then legal institutional areas, including the dispute settlements. So compared to the CPTPP, it's still still quite comprehensive, although many have also expressed some concerns that the RCEP does not offer the very high quality full liberalization the provisions. But our study actually uses the computable general equilibrium model to offer quantitative analysis that look at the multifaceted effects of FTA, including the implications for the economic agents and benefits costs and potential structural changes associated with this RCEP implementation. In the region, there are seven economies, and there's also participating both in CPTPP and RCEP. So under the scenarios that we have, we will include the first effects of CPTPP, and then the RCEP effects are added as a marginal the effect on top of the CPTPP estimation. And all these are based on the scenario that the current, the US, China, the trade tension will still continue until 2030. Which is based on the phase 1 agreement which signed in January 2020. So our model uses a 19 sector, 29 vision, and the equation and the parameters of dynamic CGE model will reflect the mainstream assumptions about market structure, trade patterns, and consumer preferences, and production technology, etc. And then these are represented by input-output tables, electricity, the elasticities, and then other parameters. For example, like how consumption demand will respond to income will be also reflected. The structure is built from the multiple data sources, and the model is calibrated based on the 2015 data, which is our benchmark year. And the empirical results now will be based on the cumulative effects of CPTPP and then RCEP. As you can see in the chart, the CPTPP adds 188 billion to the world income, while RCEP adds the additional 263 billion US dollars. The RCEP, the income gains are somewhat greater than those from the CPTPP. Next slide, please. So in terms of export effects, the patterns are quite similar to income effects. Effects are generally distributed uneven. ASEAN members of CPTPP experience quite a significant increase in trade and trade from RCEP, except Singapore also experienced a small degree of significant increase from trade and then income. Then Singapore is a bit of an exception because it experiences a small degree of the reverse trade diversion due to the preference erosion. So next slide, please. The gains from the CPTPP and RCEP are quite significant, as seen in the previous two slides, but income effects are quite uneven across economies, both in terms of absolute and then percentage terms. There are also significant differences between the distribution of benefits from CPTPP, which are mainly flowing to the East Asian economies, which have the kind of like the new trade agreement effect. And this include like Japan, and then also some Malaysia, and then North American economies from CPTPP, and then from RCEP, the benefits are mostly East Asian economies in, for example, China, Japan, and Korea. RCEP effects also translate into changes in employment. Can we look at the next slide, please? So specifically, the nationally estimated elasticity in labor supply are used to project how the wage increase coming from the trade, and then also the income increase will cause workers to move to the formal labor markets. And then these effects are separately calculated for skilled and unskilled workers. From CPTPP, there will be 1.5 million total jobs created, and from RCEP, there are 2.6 million jobs created. And China loses a job marginally from CPTPP, but it will gain 1.4 million jobs due to the RCEP. Mexico and Vietnam will experience some significant gains from CPTPP, and Vietnam will further add to employment from RCEP. In terms of employment, Malaysia, Japan, New Zealand will also have smaller but positive gains. Next slide, please. Sectorally, the results also offer additional detail on the potential the regional integration in East Asia, and also some changes in the regional supply chain. Both CPTPP and RCEP reduce trade barriers by as much as about 1/3 for manufacturing sectors. The large share of these cuts are attributable to RCEP compared to the CPTPP. Barriers tend to be highest in the food-related productions and then services outside the utilities in the base. But the tariffs and the non-tariff barriers on the manufacturing goods tend to be also quite positive. The effects, positive effects from the tariffs and the non-tariff barriers will be also positive. But the large effects are coming from the removal of non-tariff barriers. This is also benefiting the RCEP economies much more. RCEP is particularly effective in reducing the barriers to trade in primary products, and to some degree in the manufacturing and then services. The next slide, please. The projected changes in the trade barriers can be broken down into these different sets. And as you can see that the non-tariff barriers will drive the ultimate value added of the RCEP agreement, accounting for about 2/3 of the total effects. The rules of tariffs and then the rules of origin stand at 17 and then 16% separately, and but these are still the comparatively modest, and this is because most of the ASEAN economies and then RCEP members had ASEAN FTA or ASEAN +1 FTA, which actually had a relatively modest tariff to begin with. And this China will gain mostly also from the non-trade barriers reduction, especially from the non-tariff barriers that affect trade and services. This will require significant changes in the China's own service barriers as well as the barriers of partner countries. China's initial service barriers are relatively high, suggesting that the significant inefficiency in the provision of services in the Chinese economy. And RCEP will certainly address some of these issues. Next slide, please. So RCEP presents both challenges and opportunities. The foremost important is the implementation challenges. There's going to be the effort to expand and deepen coverage based on the extensive built-in work plan to unlock the potential of RCEP benefits. There's certainly opportunity for ASEAN economies and also for ADB to play a key role in supporting the implementation process through creating the closer dialogue and make sure that the implementation can be made in time. Also creating the business friendly also the ecosystem through domestic reforms. The RCEP needs to provide its value added to firms and investors in order to materialize the expected benefits, as it will compete with the existing network of FTAs that will continue to be in place and may further develop. Therefore, the built-in agenda in RCEP towards further regional economic integration are key aspects to convince stakeholders, all stakeholders of the commitment of RCEP member states. So next slide, please. Okay. Finally, for the policy implication, there's a huge heterogeneity in the distribution of gains, as you have seen, and the trade relationship with the PRC played an important role in making this the gains, and the gain differences are also depending on how the economy is engaged in the trade. So these are quite an important sort of the factors to determine countries' potential gains from RCEP. RCEP presents the challenges and opportunities at the same time. Therefore, the ADB needs to support its member economies to make sure that the RCEP does not remain just the paper and maximizing the potential benefits while mitigating the losses. So let me stop here.
Thank you, Cyn-Young. Our next presenter is Dr. Pramila Crivelli, an economist in the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department of ADB. She has worked in academia and UN organization before joining ADB. Her research interest covers applied econometrics in international trade policy, trade negotiations, rules of origins, and others. Pramila is part of the RCEP knowledge team within ADB. Over to you, Pramila.
Sorry, okay. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, thank you very much, Sanchita, and thank you for the organizers of this conference. I really look forward to the discussions because, as it has been mentioned, it's really timely to discuss RCEP agreements and its implementation. So I am going to present like a preview of a forthcoming report that we'll launch very soon, and some also additional research results that we have conducted in ADB, mostly focusing on market access and regulatory issues. Okay, so to start with the scope of the analysis, just to explain a little bit the background and the idea of this research, I think it has been very clear from the previous presentation that RCEP can generate, really massive benefits and benefit the regions in general. At the same time, as it has been mentioned, some observers may discuss the shallow provisions of the agreements because sometimes it's not as deep as what is existing. So the objective was to look at these two apparently contradictory statements, the massive gains and these the provisions that could be improved, and try to conciliate and try to understand, how to reach those benefits, because we need to reach these benefits. Potential benefits do exist. They have been calculated, estimated. So what do we do now based on the text, based on an agreement on paper? What do we need to do to get, to materialize those benefits? So we looked at the 20 chapters of RCEP, but obviously I'm not going to present you all the results today, only selected. Then we compared with some provisions of other agreements, in particular the CPTPP and WTO provisions in some agreements, some GATS or SPS agreements, and also ATIGA in the case of rules of origin. Now, we identified some shallow provisions or deep provisions. And the idea is not like just to criticize the agreements, but the idea is just to say when we identify the provision that might not be, that could be improved, or that maybe are not as deep as the other agreements, this is keeping in mind that the RCEP is a living agreement with the forward-looking objective of reaching those benefits in the future through further intergovernmental work and RCEP building agenda. So what I'm presenting today is really a snapshot, just selected chapters and the textual analysis. And then we'll move to market access provisions and trading goods, where we have conducted a little bit more of analysis, simply because I would say that's where in the agreements there is more meat, there is more, the text is and it's normal because RCEP at the end is a trade agreement. So the traditional part of the trade agreements is slightly more developed. So that's why we're going to discuss this a little bit more in details. SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and TBT, technical barriers to trade. So the main results are that, first of all, the main observation is that there is no WTO plus provisions, or we have not observed WTO plus provisions in RCEP, and the coverage is less extensive than the CPTPP. So, and something quite important we noticed is that there is no provisions for the establishment of an SPS or a TBT committee to bring the agenda forward. And this casts certain doubts on the effectiveness of these provisions and market access. And this might be particularly critical for developing countries or least developed countries that rely heavily on agricultural goods. And we know that, in fact, SPS and especially SPS are one of the major non-tariff measures and that affects the most developing economies when exporting to other countries. It has been captured also in the model presented previously that if we manage to reduce those barriers, then we could have extensive benefits. Now, looking at the agreements itself, it seems like we will need further work because there is no additional provision as compared to other agreements, and most importantly, no building agenda. On customs procedures and trade facilitation, you have relatively similar provisions as the World Trade Organization trade facilitation agreements and TPTPP. Two provisions are quite ambitious on customs clearance within 48 hours, or 6 if this is express consignment, and also the time limit of 150 days insurance of advanced rulings. We just need to keep in mind that these are ambitious provisions, but the language is hortatory. So we can still, it means we will need to see how they are effectively used and implemented. And there is no, something that would benefit also the agreement would be to have a coordination with the implementation of the trade facilitation agreements. We all know that at the domestic levels, countries are in the process of implementing the trade facilitation agreements. So, you know, the different categories, and well, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. So it would be nice to have also kind of a matching or a complementarity and coordination between the implementation of those agreements. On trading services, I think the structure and the scope is relatively borrows from ASEAN +1 FTAs and CPTPP. And as in the case of trading goods, there is no automatic extension of benefits and commitments under previous FTAs or under previous agreements. So here we may ask the question, does it exactly the new ball effect? Because if there is no automatic extension of the commitments under previous FTA, what we call an MFN provision, then you will in fact increase the heterogeneity, regulatory heterogeneity. But that said, there are many positive aspects of these chapters, in particularly market access opportunities for a wide variety of sectors, including educational services, health services, computer-related services, business services. There are also 3 appendix that are quite detailed on telecommunications, professional services, financial services, where we do observe incremental value. And last but not least, members will adopt progressively a negative list approach, although with different timelines, but it means that we do expect even an expansion in coverage in trading services. So overall, it's quite promising. On investment, well, here the report does not really identify much of benefits. The reason is, because most of the countries in the regions are already covered by, the investors are already covered by other international investments agreements. And it's likely to induce also the absence of investor-state dispute settlements. So the ISDS might also be perceived as problematic because it may induce the investors to use other ISDS dispute settlements instead of using RCEP state dispute settlement that might be quite, politically sensitive. Now, despite the shortcoming, again, several positive features is the adoption from the beginning this time, not like in services, but from the beginning, we have a negative list approach. Exemptions are quite important. There's a long list, but still it is a negative list. So it's worth mentioning it because it's quite good news. And there is also prohibition of performance requirements that is extended for forced transfer and in particular technologies, production process. So here we have also provisions that should facilitate investment. All right. On cross-cutting, let me maybe just highlight a few points in this issue. So on IP, intellectual property, here we really have a quantum leap in comparison with ASEAN FTAs. And why? Well, because the chapter covers similar provisions as in the TRIPS agreements, and also new fields, namely generic resources, traditional knowledge, folklore. So meaning it also covers geographical indications. And yeah, this is quite new. And even though it might not be make much of a difference for CPTPP for members that are already member of the CPTPP, but for other countries it will it actually makes a big difference. Now on e-commerce, maybe let me just skip directly to e-commerce because I think it's quite of a important topic and that we will further discuss today. Is that the commitments are first for non-CPTPP members, and they go beyond those in FTAs between our sub-countries and ASEAN agreements on electronic commerce. So there are really value added here in the e-commerce chapters. And especially the provisions on data flow and data localizations are relatively less restrictive than what we can observe in other domestic or other legislation or other agreements signed by RCEP members. We just need to keep in mind that still there are exceptions to these provisions that may also reduce their effectiveness, but still it's really a breakthrough to have these provisions in the RCEP agreement. And also there is the establishment of a dialogue on commitments. And again, this is first of this kind for non-CPTPP members. Let me skip the two other sections because I think we have run out of time. So I now have discussed the main selected chapters where we have identified few value added, but also quite a lot of shallow provisions with auditory languages and things that we can improve through intergovernmental coordination. Now, let's have a look at trading goods and the most traditional areas of trade agreements. And we will look at it in the perspective of trying to understand, will RCEP change the landscape in trading goods? Okay, and so to understand that we need to keep in mind the overall context, and I'm sure you're all aware of it, that we have in the region many agreements in place, and even the most recent one that is in the table, the one signed by PRC and Cambodia, that we will hear a little bit more about in the panel discussion. But so the fact is that we have RCEP in this context raise the questions, what does it in fact bring and how can it help beyond those effective agreements? To answer that question, we need to understand, what makes RCEP attractive. If you think of the perspective of a company, you are a firm, you want to export a good, what do you have in mind? Well, the first thing is that you will look at the coverage of your products. Is it covered or not? Then you will look at what is the preference margin. Do I gain? If I pay a tariff, normally I pay MFN tariffs. Now with RCEP, I pay less. And you will also look at the ease of complying with rules of origin. And and not only complying with it, but also so in terms of stringency, but also with respect to administrative procedures at customs. So, and why is this important is because all these agreements that I'm showing here, it needs to be kept in mind that even if they are in place, they may not completely be fully utilized. So meaning the MFN tariff still matters in some cases. And we need, in fact, to raise the utilization of these agreements. So we need to look at these factors. Why? Let me just give you a quick example on why we need to look at rules of origin and tariffs in a holistic way altogether. Simply because if you look at this example where you have a laser that is manufactured in Korea and exported to PRC, but they use, to produce this laser, you use parts coming from Japan. Then without RCEP, what you have is that you will either, importer will have to pay MFN duty of 6%, or a reduced rate of duty of 2.4% if the PRC Republic of Korea agreements is applicable. And it will be applicable only if the Republic of Korean manufacturers manage to meet the rules of origin, which might be the case or not. And if this is not the case, then you will have to pay 6% duty when exported to PRC. Now, under RCEP, the novelty is that, well, eventually all these rates should be lowered to 0. And most importantly, with diagonal accumulation, you will have the parts of lasers coming from Japan counted as originating. So it's increasing the probability that Republic of Korea can meet the rule of origin. Now, so it shows here MFN do still matter because sometimes they are still applied, and we need to know, so when are those gains going to materialize? Because we may eventually go to 0 tariffs and have accumulation, but when? And so we looked at the tariff schedules under RCEP. There are 38, so it's quite complex simply because there are differentiated offers. And those differentiated offers are made by different countries. So in the first column here, you see the countries that have single offers. Then Japan has a hybrid version and differentiated offers for PRC, Indonesia, Republic of Korea, Philippines, and Vietnam. So what is surprising here is that, for example, you may have ASEAN member economies making differentiated offers to other ASEAN economies, meaning that under RCEP, you may have a positive tariff, so you may have to pay duties, while under ASEAN or ATIGA, you do not have to pay duties. So you may have even increase in tariffs. But again, this has to be analyzed in the overall context of market access and looking also at the accumulation possibilities with rules of origin. So here, when do these gains or do these tariff reduction will apply? You see that it can be quite long, because after in this graph, you see that after 15 years, for example, if you take the fourth bar, 77% of intra-regional imports will be in fact tariff-free, so duty-free, but the rest will still be applied tariffs between, and here you see the different categories of tariffs that will be applied. So you see that it's really quite long, and in fact, 42% of trade will be liberalized within 5 years only, and then progressively this will increase. Even after 20 years, you will still have 11% of trade that will be that won't be MFN free, so that won't be duty free. Sorry. So I think we don't have much time for that, so I will just now move directly to the rules of origin. So I talked about the tariffs. So how the rules of origin have been negotiated and have been designed, I would say, in RCEP. Let me go straight past the history, but go straight to the main shortcomings that we have identified. The fact is that we have seen that there is scarce predictability, which is a feature that has been inherited from ASEAN rules of origin. And one important issue that might be also further discussed by private sector later on is that we have an absence of full cumulation. That is, in the CPTPP, you have full cumulation. Here, you do not have full cumulation, so you do not allow for cumulation of working or processing operations. Proof of origin in our step is quite archaic because it's still a certificate of origins with stamp and signature, with provisions to possibly move away in the future, but for the moment, it's definitely not a best practice, meaning at the customs, it can be quite cumbersome to prove your origin. And the tariff differentials raise a lot of questions on the application of cumulation, and this will be quite complicated for customs officials to implement. Okay, let me skip this. These are the product-specific rules of origin. You see there are a wide range, and I'm not going to discuss it because I don't have the time, but just to let you know that we have conducted an analysis, and I think the main result and the most important in the forward-looking approach is that we observe convergence. So you have a heterogeneity, you have different stringency. RCEP is not more liberal than other agreements, but we have observed convergence, meaning that even if the rules are different, sometimes they mean the same. And in these areas, we believe that there is really an ample scope for simplification that could be taken for next steps. So let me conclude with this slide. About our main findings, it seems like there are a number of actions that are needed to make RCEP agreements really reach the benefits that have been identified, and that can actually promote regional integration in the region. First, we need to address the shallow provisions that I discussed already through maybe the ASEAN way, meaning that we need to, have further intergovernmental work. On tariffs, we have a built-in agenda, so it needs to be activated on acceleration of tariff commitments and sectoral initiatives. And finally, on rules of origins, we will also need to act under the built-in agenda to discuss possibility of simplification in the future. I will stop here. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pramila. I'm sure our audience have many questions on our presentations, but let's move to the panel discussion first. You may see like many of your burning questions are already answered by our esteemed panelists. So to start the panel discussion, let me hand over the session to Ms. Jenina Ibañez. She's a senior reporter covering Philippines economic development, international trade, and foreign investment in BusinessWorld. Thank you, Jenina, for your interest in moderating the session. Floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. I'm Jenina Ibañez from BusinessWorld, and I'll be leading our panel discussion on RCEP today. So we have 5 distinguished panelists who will first make their introductory speeches, then we will go on with a discussion. If you have any questions, please send them over for our Q&A session later. So let's get started. Our first speaker, Mr. Sok-Heng Sim, is the Secretary of State of the Ministry of Commerce of Cambodia. Mr. Sim began his government career at the Ministry of Commerce in mid-1998. He was appointed as the Director of the Department of Intellectual Property and became the President of the Secretariat of National Committee for Intellectual Property Rights of Cambodia. In May 2016, he was appointed as Director General for International Trade and further appointed as Undersecretary of State of Ministry of Commerce in November 2018. He was later appointed as the Secretary of State in June 2020. Mr. Sim has been the Chief Negotiator for regional and bilateral free trade agreements, and he used to be the Senior Economic Officials Meeting Lead for Cambodia, handling trade-related affairs under the framework of ASEAN and ASEAN partners. Mr. Sim.
Thank you so much for a very good introduction to me. First of all, let me thank the ADB. I'm very happy to see and happy the participation for today. And I noticed the ADB very actively on research and publishing, like the presenter already make some present here. And previously, I used to attend some of the ADB panel as well. It's very good to see that. And especially for today, you have a wide range of public awareness. So this is the thing that I like most from the ADB. And start with RCEP, I may regard as Donna and I, we are negotiating together, and I can say that RCEP is very friendly agreement. Because why it's friendly agreement? Because it's able to accommodate the developing and LDC country. All are 3 groups are in there. So this is the very friendly agreement. Some of you may say high ambition or not high ambition, but at least start with friendly, and we are still continue developing on that. So why it have a lot of building agenda there, and it's the way that we are able to move forward. And second point, I want to show you that the Cambodian already utilize that, and there are some business exporter already export via the RCEP and use the rule origin already, Pamela just mentioned, and to some certain country already in the region. So this is I'm happy. And the English newspaper in Cambodian, you may see they are posting on the first certificate origin for issue in Cambodian, and now more and more are coming. And another recently, even this week, my friend from area here also joining that we just launching the book this week for the RCEP on that one. And one of the book, there are also implications for Asia and Pacific, but there is chapter mentioned exactly on Cambodian as well, how we able to generate the economic growth, as well as last month on the World Bank. And EDB also play a very important role to publishing on that, to make a very good analysis on that. And another thing, just to share with you, the published in general public in Cambodian, they are very interesting. We just released one page of that benefit for Cambodia economy based on the area research. So just only 69 hours, there are over 100 views on that one page on that benefit. So I'm really happy to see that. So you may see by end up that I can say that our government pay very strong attention and also will value for the RCEP, and we are strongly believe that RCEP can able to help for economic recovery in our region, as well as bring the global situation moving forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving on to our next speaker, Donna Gultam is a former director of ASEAN Trade Negotiation and Directorate General for International Trade Negotiation at the Ministry of Trade in Indonesia. Since June 2021, she has been the chairperson of the Indonesia Anti-Dumping Committee at the Ministry of Trade. Ms. Gultam.
Hi, thank you, Jenina. And first of all, let me thank ADB for convening this symposium. I think this is very momentum, timely, because we are just in time of implementing this RCEP. Although you are all aware that Indonesia is now working hard to be able to implement this agreement. So like I think I have to congratulate Sim for being able to already utilize this RCEP agreement once this is being implemented. So I think just would like to thank as well the speakers. I mean, the presentation that you make, the study that you have done, I think this is very valuable. I think we learn from this. And I just like to assure you that, you know, ASEAN way, I think because this RCEP negotiation is actually ASEAN-led negotiation, should I say. So like, if you saying that this is somehow not really ambitious, some part is ambitious, this is how you see, this is actually the reflection of how varied is the members of this RCEP, the countries like my colleague Sim already highlighted that we are consisting of developing and least developed. So every single country have their own vote. So then we cannot just somehow dilute any concern of the country. So how you see 8 years of negotiation is a very tough, it was very tough negotiation. And I was there for 8 years. So I experienced how the development is working. And I should say that Indonesia, as one of the member countries, is so glad that we are able to sign the RCEP. And during the pandemic, COVID, you know, we have to work through our own house in finalizing the agreement, but unfortunately we are not able to bring our colleague India to join with us. But really, this RCEP will be even even the very how should I say, like very a momentum if India is there as well. But we are also aware that India will join with us later on because you see the accession clause is there. So even for the new countries, India is our previous. During the negotiation, so we always consider India as a special place in RCEP countries. So then we would like them to join us as soon as possible. So I think as you already mentioned, the speaker already mentioned that the RCEP is actually the additional value for ASEAN. That we already have the ASEAN +1 FTA with all our partners. So you see how ASEAN is moving toward bigger region, but you know, we are very comfortable first. We have to have this friendly, like my colleague said, the agreement has to be joining. These are all partners. I think this is really big for us. We would like to have actually spillover effect because you just mentioned it, Pramila, that some of our RCEP countries, we are not having this FTA relationship, but then by having this RCEP, then we bring them all together. So we are so sure that we are going to have this spillover effect to the ASEAN countries, and as well as the opportunities. I see these new opportunities for especially ASEAN countries. This is especially Indonesia again, to attract new investors. I think new industrial development to utilize this RCEP is really welcome, and we are working hard for this actually in Indonesia to bring the investment coming to Indonesia, helping us to grow Indonesia actually in our economic make use of this agreement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Mr. Saul Omizaki. He is the director of the Economic Integration Studies Group Development Studies Center at the Institute of Developing Economies at the Japan External Trade Organization, where he joined in 1995. During his temporary assignment to the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia in Jakarta between 2008 and 2011, he contributed to several flagship projects related to the economic integration in ASEAN and neighboring countries. Mr. Saul Omizaki.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, ADB, for inviting me to this symposium. It's a great honor of mine. Can you see my slide? Well, okay. Today, I would like to share my views on RCEP's e-commerce chapter and some Japanese perspective. I don't think I need to talk a lot about RCEP itself. Here, I just want to highlight some key points from the viewpoint of Japan. First, for Japan, RCEP is the first PTA with our closest neighbor, China and Korea. These new country pairs are expected to enjoy larger benefits from the RCEP. And in addition, the geographical scope of the RCEP fits better to existing regional value chain than other ones. And also, the more flexible rules in the RCEP are very attractive to Japanese perspective. And also some WTO extra provisions, including e-commerce. Currently, several fora have agreements on e-commerce, and RCEP is one of them. And some others include the Joint Statement Initiative for e-commerce under the WTO, which includes 86 countries, and also CPTPP, ASEAN, and others. And the contents are different, reflecting the membership. And now I'd like to share my views on e-commerce chapters of RCEP based on a mapping exercise using a taped database, which stands for Trade Agreements Provisions on E-commerce and Data. This database evaluates 84 e-commerce related provisions in more than 300 PTAs, preferential trade agreements, agreed after 2000, by scoring 0 for no commitments, 1 for soft commitments, and 3 for hard, that is binding commitments, and 2 for the mixed commitments, mixture of soft and hard commitments. For more details, please take a look at the reference below. Then, sorry, this is very small on your screen. Out of 84 items in the database, I picked up 16 as listed in the table, and 3 items, namely the data free flow and prohibiting requests for data localization, prohibiting requests for source code. These are regarded as highly important components, particularly to ensure the data free flow with trust, which is called DFFT. And basically, this is to compare e-commerce provisions in RCEP with other major PTAs, such as DEPA, Japan-US, ASEAN, USMCA, and so on. Then, according to this table, the characteristics of RCEP can be summarized as follows. The first is, of course, the size. The GDP share is 30%. The second, it's already here. The dispute settlement mechanism is not supporting the effective implementation, unfortunately. As a result, all e-commerce provisions in RCEP cannot be regarded as hard commitments. The third, reflecting the diversity of the membership, RCEP includes provisions for less developed members and the MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. Then another small table, sorry. The 3 principles, the first, the data free flow. For this, all RCEP members had equivalent provisions in PTAs agreed before RCEP. That is, it was easy for all RCEP members to agree on these provisions. The second one, provision of requests for data localization. This commitment was new commitment for Korea and China. And the third one, prohibition of requests for support was also new for 7 members. 7 are China and Korea, and also Thailand, Philippines, Laos, and Myanmar and Cambodia. So the second and third item could be a point of disagreement. As a result, All these items were agreed in RCEP, but in the form of soft commitments. And on the other hand, 4 other members, Singapore, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, accepted less than maximum level of commitments they already agreed in PTAs before RCEP. Then some Japanese perspectives. I already mentioned DFFT. Data free flow with trust is a key word for Japan, particularly since the G20 Osaka summit in 2019. 3 principles, as I already mentioned, data free flow and prohibiting requests for data localization and so forth. And RCEP covered all these items, but failed to establish effective enforcement mechanism. As a convenience of joint statement initiatives under the WTO with Singapore and Australia, Japan has been working to draft the e-commerce rules in a wider framework. But unfortunately, the last ministerial Congress, MC12, was postponed due to the COVID pandemic. And from the viewpoint of Japan, the role of the RCEP Secretariat is important to ensure the implementation of RCEP, which lacks the effective enforcement mechanism, that is the dispute settlement mechanism. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. For our next speaker, we have Mr. Genisius Narjoko. He is the Senior Economist of the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. As part of his role there, he provides evidence-based policy recommendations to a number of ASEAN member states on topics related to the ASEAN economic community or regional integration in general. Mr. Narjoko.
Thank you for your kind introductions, Janine. So let me share my short PPT. Can you see it? Yeah, okay. I presume you can see it. Yeah? Okay. Thank you again for ADB for inviting me to this prestigious event, and also thank you to Dr. Cyn-Young Park and Dr. Pramila for their presentations. They're very good, giving us some ideas on the situations on RCEP. Now. I was asked to comment on the global value chains and a bit of ROOs in particular for these panel discussions. So just a couple of points on the IPN, these production networks of global value chains. I guess what is clear is that the global value chains or international production networks in ASEAN and in East Asia are very strong, robust. This has been the case because historically the development of production networks has started from the late 1980s, and the strength even more for the post-Asian financial crisis 97-98. But still, there's still a lot of variations in the participations of countries in the global value chains. Second, this is I'm telling you a number of facts about global value chains or production networks in the regions. Second is the IPNs or global value chains prove to be resilient as well. In these regions, we are prone to natural disasters in addition to economic crisis and now the pandemic. But what we have seen from our research is that there is a quick recovery out of this crisis or natural disasters. Even during this pandemic, there are papers coming from us, from Professor Kimura and Obasi-san and a few others, that's showing the quick recovery of the IPNs and global value chains. So I guess the basic fact is that unlike the other parts of the world, North America, Europe, there is a strong production networks across countries already built up in ASEAN and East Asia region, and this is a strong capital for the regions. But given these large variations across countries, there's also big room for deeper and extending the value chains of the networks across the countries. So that's one of the key messages that I'd like to share. The other one is, now, I guess we all know, and Ibu Dona and Mr. Somkeng knows this very well, that the RCEP was built on this basis. I guess one of the strong bases that we call it the broader ASEAN members, that is ASEAN plus the 6 East Asia Summit members, would like to extend and deepen these production networks between countries, and this is what, you know, one of the important features of RCEP. That is furthering on these global value chains of international production networks. And this is through a number of key messages or key points. First is through this extending stable trading system. I guess what is important to note, despite all of the points that Dr. Cyn-Young and Dr. Pramila have mentioned, is that, you know, there is an FTA between China, Japan, and Korea, and that is happen only within RCEP. So this is very important factors about the CJK factors that also drives the productivity improvement in the regions. Second, ROO. Dr. Pramila has shown that, you know, a lot of issues with ROO. Yes, that's correct. And in fact, our research within area also have not yet concluded, and I guess there's still a lot of things that we need to research on this ROO. But the point about ROO in RCEP is that now, unlike the +1 situations, in terms of outsourcing, when a company, for example, in, you know, sitting in Thailand or Indonesia or Vietnam, and they need to outsource from both the other ASEAN member states or one of the East Asia members, excluding India, then they can utilize RCEP. And this is one of the plus value of RCEP. Speeding up liberalization on services sectors, given all of the potential weaknesses that have been mentioned. But then, if we are looking at the literatures on services liberalization in ASEAN, adoption of negative list actually is a big deal for ASEAN countries. ASEAN AFAS liberalization agenda from 1992 has always been in the positive list until RCEP. So this is a big deal for ASEAN member states, and this is actually a reflection of how willing the ASEAN member states in furthering the regional integrations, because the future of global value chains, especially in the era of digitalizations, is moving more towards what's so-called in Baldwin's topology as a third unbundling, which is the inclusion of more services value added into the global value chains. And lastly, you know, RCEP is expected to strongly facilitate expansion of GCC through harmonization and liberalizing further trade facilitations. This is a challenge for many RCEP members, especially perhaps for ASEAN member states. But then it underlines the importance of further investment in the institutions for this. And one of the special features of RCEP, on top of the other ASEAN trade facilitation features, is there is the self-certifications. We don't know yet, you know, how the self-certification will be implemented, how successful it is, or what are the challenges. But the point is, even for ASEAN member states, putting it up as a commitment for self-certification, it is already a big deal for many of the ASEAN countries. Next one, the last one, a bit of comments on ROO. Again, still subject to deep research on the question of whether ROOs under RCEP is more global value chain facilitating. than ROOs of other FTA signed by the RCEP members. And this is when we talk about especially the +1, the ASEAN +1 ROOs. Nonetheless, some comments from one of our research under area, written by Dr. Kazunobu Hayakawa, is that, he in his paper showed there are some positive margin from tariff committed under RCEP compared to the other ASEAN +1 FTA. But even if there is still, say, zero marginal preference, firms still can choose RCEP or utilize RCEP because of there's some other positive aspect coming from the ROO. So I guess, and on top of the positive margin that still appears between RCEP and the other FTA, even if the margin is zero, there is still worth for the RCEP members to use RCEP because of this benefit coming from the ROO. So that's the end of my comments that I prepare. But quickly, following Mr. Sokeng and then Ibu Dona, I would like to underline is that yes, indeed, all of this flexibility reflected in RCEP somehow, and more of it actually reflect the situation of how RCEP can gather countries with different level of development. In fact, I understand in the area book launch on RCEP a few days ago, in the last sessions on RCEP and Cambodia economy, there was one remark made by one of the panelists saying that Cambodia wouldn't have been part of RCEP if Cambodia was not part of ASEAN. So that's really tells one of the big motivations of RCEP, and it really hugging the less or developing ASEAN member states. So that's very important point that we want to, I guess, ASEAN would like to also stress. And indeed, it is an ASEAN-led initiative. So it will, ASEAN, in ASEAN vision, ASEAN would like to grow together, leave nobody behind, and all of this vision, which is, I guess, nicely reflected in RCEP, reflected by that point made by a local Cambodian that in that panelist. I will stop there, Jenina. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those insights. So finally, our last speaker, before we go on to the discussion, Wong Meng Yu is a partner in the Deloitte Singapore office and is the leader of the Global Trade Advisory practice in Southeast Asia. He regularly advises clients in navigating investments into the region from a market access perspective involving the movement of goods, services, and investments. Meng Yu?
Sure, thanks, Jenina. I just realized that I am the only private sector participant on the panel. So thank you very much, ADB, for the invitation to participate, and really nice to meet and hear from everyone. In the interest of time, maybe I'll just give a 2-minute brief intro on my end, and then I think we can move into the discussions. So just by way of brief background, in my role as the Southeast Asia Customs and Trade Practice Leader, I work with a lot of multinationals and also local clients in a lot of their market access strategies, and also their duty mitigation and optimization perspective. Having worked on international trade matters for the past 16 years, 11 of which were in an international law firm, and the remaining 5 in my current role across Malaysia, Hong Kong, China, and now Singapore. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of advisory and lobbying work. I have also worked on investment disputes with the ASEAN governments, and in reviewing both tariff and non-tariff barriers Trade remedies is also a key area of my practice. So yeah, very good to hear that Ibu Dona is also the chairman in Indonesia of the investigating authority. I am quite passionate about the area of unfair trade practices, and fully support the trade remedies provision that all of the ASEAN and the partner countries have also replicated within RCEP to make sure that the minimum WTO standards on the trade remedies are found within. On the FTA's front, we've done a lot of advisory work for not only the bilateral, the ASEAN +1 agreements across all of the goods, services, and investment chapters. I think as Pramila mentioned, the trade in goods has historically been the bedrock and foundation of growth of many of the ASEAN states. And I think it still continues to be. But as the services sector continues to grow in terms of contribution to the AMS economies, I think the continued liberalization of services sectors will continue to be key for a sustainable and increased economic growth for the AMS, in my opinion. So it's good that RCEP has indeed made progress on many of the services commitments. And I know it's a hybrid approach between the positive list and the negative list. But as we eventually move towards the negative list approach, as more member countries become more comfortable with opening up their services sector, I think that is where we will need to go. So again, very happy to be here. And I think the event is indeed very timely, not only because the RCEP has recently come into force, but the call for regional integration has never been stronger, especially given the global trade environment, where more continents are starting to focus on either their domestic or regional economies. Back to you, Jenina.
Thank you so much, Mingyu, and thank you to all of our speakers. So we will now proceed with our discussion. If any of our viewers have any questions for our speakers, please send them over so that we can ask them as well. So since our speakers are from various countries or from the public and private sectors, I'll be asking them one at a time, but I do encourage others to jump in as well if they have any insights to add. So I want to start with Mr. Sim. So what does the signing of the Cambodia-China FTA signal about the RCEP? When exporting to China, which agreement do you expect to be used by the private sector and why?
Thank you, Jenina. This is a very important question. As you may see that the RCEP is very big and combined, as I said earlier, there are 3 groups of the country, developing and LDC. So some of them, even those they are willing to provide to Cambodia, but in this big FTA, mega FTA may be hard for them. So why the only way is a bilateral FTA may be able to compensate. I can say exactly is a complement better than say maybe, but it complement, it really complement, and not only did by Cambodian alone. There are many countries, for example, like Vietnam, they also did with Korea after the ASEAN Korea FTA. Even Ibu Dona here, she just finished with Korea as well. Even those we have the ASEAN Korea, including Cambodia. I am also the chief negotiator for Cambodian Korea FTA. This is a thing that we track on, and it is a very quite interesting, and even we have able to up for over 5%, depend on from FTA to FTA, but at this specific exactly what the really potential good and business private sector that they wish to have, because all of this one is we gathering from the private sector. I'm happy to see that have a good representative from private sector here, because this is the end of this, the end of the agreement is they are the one who using, like one of our colleagues from ADB mentioned, that is not just a paper. This need the people use it, and Cambodian government and especially my ministry, we rely on the private sector is a driving force for the economic growth and also for using this one. So I may jump short like this one. If you further, I can explain more. Thank you, Jenina.
Yeah, to follow up on that, how do you think we could raise the level of ambition of RCEP so that you could avoid exacerbating this noodle bowl of FTAs in the region?
It is not something easy to say in theory, but in practical, like you mentioned, Ibu Dona experienced that for her 8 years, I'm about 6 years, so we know how to feel is not something easy. And so the big, they are very carefully when open one line of the tariff line to specific, because you know already, because this is a billion people, billion market, is not something that like a bilateral FTA that only few hundred, even Cambodian is very small, over 10 million. This is a completely different. So why it is possible to, but it maybe take time a little bit. Let's see after implementation up to this 4 or 5 years, we have a general review. It may be see after this general review. I believe that they're going to have something need to be open more, because the global value chain and the accumulation, like some of our colleagues just mentioned, very important, the accumulation. Thank you.
Right. Again, so this area report said the ASEAN least developed countries of Cambodia, Laos, PDR, and Myanmar, they also experienced positive gains from RCEP, but they need to undertake deeper structural reforms to fully benefit from the agreement. So how do you think that Cambodia, as one of these LDCs, stands to benefit from the agreement?
Very good. In fact, we take the recommendation, not only area, not only ADB, but other also recommend. We are reform. It's good for our government already, even before starting negotiation. Also, we are starting reform already. We starting the big reform is from we accession to WTO, and after that we are in ASEAN and other agreements. So we are reform. Even now, a few days ago, my colleague from area maybe see that I present only one slide, say that even now we are using almost online. So when we negotiation, they talking about online is not so much difficult for Cambodia anymore, because we are practicing it for many years already. This is the first thing. Second, some of colleagues already mentioned regulation or law. We already adopt to prepare ahead to serve for the business purpose to make it easy. Even we are among the few countries in the world, among the top countries in the world that we are using private sector forum as and in Cambodia is chaired by our Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister regard this decision as a cabinet decision when he saw the issue to the private sector regard this one, and all of level of government must implement. So this is the thing, and this is a good thing. Without frankly to you, without agreement, we cannot reform, we cannot make it grow. So now, if we want maintain growth, we have to do a reform, and we have to accept for that one. This is no, we have to do it. So thank you.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes.
Just add on this is Meng-Yu here. Adding on to Mr. Sin's comment, I would just like to echo that. In fact, 3 months after the pandemic struck in March 2020. The first, ever governmental, meeting, with the customs authority was with Cambodia Customs, and throughout those discussions, it was all online, and it was all conducted in the WTO in a very orderly fashion. Yeah, so I truly echo, Mr. Sim's comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. So moving on to Ms. Donna Gautam, let's go on a rating scale, for example, like from 1 to 5, where 1 is the worst and 5 is the best. So where would you put the level of ambition of the RCEP agreement compared to the CPTPP and other ASEAN +1 FTAs?
Thank you, Janine, for the question. If you ask me, if I compare this with the ASEAN +1 FTA, this is the best. Yeah? So this is the highest ambitions of ASEAN. I think Sim is agreed with this. But I think if you ask me whether this is better than CPTPP, I think Pramila and as well Cyn-Young already, Pramila, I think, already highlighted. So if you see this apple to apple, of course you will say, that's why you say the shallow agreement kind of, but ASEAN and partners, I think, don't see this way, because we know we initiate this and agreed upon, we are so sure that we are going to move further. I think it's always open. That's the way ASEAN working with our partners. We continue working to somehow look at we will monitor the implementation of this RCEP later on. This is the normal procedures in ASEAN, and somehow recommend some kind of upgrading to the areas that we need to upgrade. So this is how, like I said to you, because we are so varied in development, the level of development. So we have to make somehow we start with the same understanding of where we are and assure that I think every members have to get the benefit out of this agreement. So we allow the time for us to bring this agreement to the better level later on. And as you know, I said that the RCEP is the best agreement out of our 5 FTA agreements. Then now I think ASEAN and partners are working to bring the existing ASEAN +1 FTAs to the better level of ambitions, at least to the same level with RCEP. So then we would like to actually somehow reduce the complicated rules under ASEAN. So later on, at the end of I don't know when, but I think for businesses, they will find later on the best later on will be whatever you say. If you are going to use the ASEAN +1 or RCEP, you see it's easily for you to select which of these mechanisms you'd like to make use of. That's how I see this RCEP agreement. Janine, back over to you.
So you said you're monitoring it, we'll be upgrading it. What are your recommendations on how the member countries could raise further the RCEP agreement?
I think, again, Pramila highlighted already, somehow, in our ASEAN +1 FTA, we don't include new issues, should I say. Maybe the very ambitious coverage of the agreement is ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand FTA, but it's really very still shallow. But now we are so brave to include these new issues already, but we know in the first place that we only bring kind of shallow agreements, but we already provide avenue later on to upgrade this. For example, this issue. So e-commerce, for example, so you have to agree upon this level, although Zaki-san is not happy with this, but I think from the right time, this time, you have to be happy with this because we are trying to bring all together 15 countries. The rich one, the developed one has to be a bit patient, bring it, and we have economic cooperation. So this, I think through this economic cooperation, somehow we will build up our capacity to be able to move up to the better ambition, should I say. Right.
Yeah, and I want to ask about your thoughts on how this agreement will be in terms of MSMEs. Like, how inclusive do you think the agreement is when it comes to MSMEs? Do you think that it offers them a level playing field when it comes to encouraging innovation?
Yeah, so if we are talking about MSMEs is always, very complicated issues because how you define the MSMEs in Indonesia compared to Japan, compared to other countries, and also with my colleagues, Cambodia. So that's why I think the chapter of MSMEs together with economic technical cooperation, these 2 chapters agreed, the first chapter that agreed under RCEP. Because we would like to ensure that these 2 chapters has to be included in this RCEP agreement, bearing in mind that the variety level of development of the members of this RCEP. So the way we crafted the agreement, how to bring this, like I said, because we are talking about different kind of, how should I say, the level playing field of this SMEs itself. So we are aware of this. So then that's why the agreement, the text provide us actually to encourage the kind of information sharing, cooperation, and increasing SMEs' ability to utilize and benefit from the opportunities created by the RCEP agreement. So this kind of information sharing, we really would like to promote this, encourage this as much as possible. Then maybe the lag behind can adopt the innovation that other countries, other members have from their SMEs. And also by establishing and maintaining a publicly accessible information platform that will contain, so then MSMEs as well with can learn out of this, and also the secretariat, the RCEP secretariat later on will always available to somehow provide information how MSMEs in the 15 countries make use of this RCEP. I think as well, yeah, cooperation in the areas of e-commerce. You see, we need to cooperate. I think, like Sim mentioned already, how then Cambodia now get used to it. When we negotiated RCEP agreement, the chapter, the e-commerce, we are not in this era yet. You know, I see the pandemic push us very hard. You have to move toward this digital issues. So at that time, when we consider this and we did negotiate this e-commerce, you know, there are so many uncertainties in our mind. So that's why we have to agree this step by step, gradually. So through the economic cooperation, then we would like to bring our MSMEs as well to make use of this e-commerce, for example, the trade, cross-border trade, that maybe they are able to do so. So what I would like to say is actually the economic cooperation as also promotes the cooperation on trade rules and regulations, access, so that this is all open. The whole coverage issues that cover in the agreement is just open for cooperation in which area that we need to somehow cooperate to each other. So I think this is also provide opportunity to MSMEs. Of course, I would say, I think from the regional perspective, this is already agreement provide this avenue for us to learn from each other. But the most important, I think you all aware that all member countries, I mean, the RCEP countries, for example, Indonesia, has to do our homework. I think we need to somehow upgrade or empower our MSMEs itself to be able to cope with this agreement. Because, you know, RCEP is all about supply chain, regional value chain. Is all about manufactured products. So really we, ASEAN, Indonesia, for example, keen to be able to be part of this regional value chain and bring our MSMEs. We are thinking of, like in Indonesia, for example, and ASEAN as well, we have this kind of ASEAN mentorship for MSMEs. I think this is very great. I think this is how we, in Indonesia also, we implement this. We try to encourage our MSMEs to be in a scale economic, to be able to make use of this RCEP. So in this kind of approach, we are working now in Indonesia. I think a lot of things we have to do. We expect actually businesses, FDIs coming to our countries. We'll also somehow aware of this, that we have MSMEs that can become the source of input for this investment, new investment in Indonesia. Of course, the government itself has to do their homework to make sure that the MSMEs can actually be the supplier for these businesses or industries in Indonesia. I think that's how I see these MSMEs, how to bring these MSMEs to be able to make use of this RCEP. Janine.
Thank you so much. Ming-Yu, did you want to add something about the inclusivity of MSME?
I did. I just wanted to add on from a Singapore perspective, to say that I think funding, grants, sometimes are quite important. And here in Singapore, there is this MRA grant, or the Market Readiness Assessment grant that's provided by Enterprise Singapore. That provides funding up to about 100,000 Singapore dollars for SMEs, MSMEs in Singapore to go abroad, and they cover several areas, including actually obtaining advice on the use of free trade agreements. So not only on RCEP, but actually all of the agreements, both bilaterals, ASEAN-based, and the mega regional ones. So funding, could be a way of helping, the MSMEs navigate, the intricacies and the complexities of RCEP.
All right, thank you so much for that. So I want to go to Mr. Saul Omizaki. So earlier you talked about the key elements of the RCEP e-commerce chapter. So I want to do something similar to earlier. So in a rating scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, where will you put the e-commerce chapter of RCEP compared to the CPTPP and other digital trade agreements signed by Japan?
Okay. Yeah. Actually, I quite agree with Ibdona on was saying that we need to take a kind of step-by-step approach. So if a group of countries comprised of advanced countries, so it will be easy to achieve a high level of agreements. But RCEP, one of the characteristics of the RCEP is the diversity, right? So in that respect, I think I compared several existing FTAs, including CPTPP and Japan-US or Japan-EU and RCEP. Then, in my view, the level of the agreement is the highest in CPTPP because it contains the 3 principles and also with the working dispute settlement mechanism, that is the enforcement mechanism. So I think that is the highest. And in US-Japan, again, all 3 principles are included, but no dispute settlement mechanism in the agreement. So that will be the second. And the next will be the Japan-EU. So in this case, only 2 of the 3 is included in the agreements, but with the dispute settlement mechanism. Maybe RCEP is the next. So all 3 principles are included, but they are not binding, only in the form of soft commitments. That is my view. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Given that, what other areas do you think need to be further negotiated before companies can see benefits?
So as I mentioned, in my view, the most important problem is how to ensure the implementation of the agreements, even though the commitments itself can be soft or hard. So it can be enforced or not. So there is no explicit enforcement mechanism. But I think the RCEP Secretariat is expected to play that kind of role. So to complement the lack of the enforcement mechanism. So in that respect, the member countries needs to have a deeper discussion over the role of the RCEP Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So going to Ming-Yu, as our private sector representative, so what do you think is the private sector sentiment towards the RCEP? How is it across different sectors and regions?
Okay, sure. I think it has been one of mixed reactions. As with any FTAs, there will be those that provide better market access, tariff reduction opportunities in certain areas or categories of goods and services. There will be those that will fall, under the sensitive or the highly sensitive track. There will be those which are excluded, from reduction or from opening up. So I think it depends on whom you ask. I think in the last 2 to 3 years, we have run seminars with our clients to test, interest in doing RCEP planning projects. At the outset, I think there was a clear skepticism or overwhelming skepticism as to whether the RCEP would actually be signed. I think mainly due to the TPP experience. So we found very little interest in companies wanting to undertake paid engagements to review the impact of RCEP on their business. Then we saw this changing towards the mid to later part of last year, when suddenly we received a lot more interest on RCEP planning in the various industries, ranging from companies dealing with agricultural produce. There are a lot of them in the ASEAN member states, food and nutritional products, FMCG companies, including apparels, to oil and gas companies dealing in downstream products like petrochem, plastics, etc. So, with the trading margins, being increasingly challenged these days, even a 3 to 5% reduction in import tariffs will do wonders to the gross margins of a company. So I think in the course of our review, three things sort of stood out. One was that for some industries, there were an immediate 0% duty from day one of RCEP's entry into force. Two was that for some products, sectors, the duty reduction was over a longer period of time, sometimes over 18 to 20 years to reach completely zero. But the third observation was that the ASEAN +1 commitments tend to be better than the RCEP commitments with immediate benefits already available. But I think this has been discussed earlier, the reasons for it, and hence the built-in agenda to improve and upgrade as we go along. So just to summarize, I think initially it was a cautious approach, and then it moved to a more receptive one, especially after RCEP was signed. So the sentiments are improving in my view.
Yes, speaking of the built-in agenda, so how well do you think the private sector has been involved or been consulted in this development?
Right. So I think for those of for the folks who regularly or are familiar with how the ASEAN +1 FTAs work, I think they are aware that it takes time. We've seen it from when AFTA came in 1992 to when Artiga was finally signed in 2009. We saw this for ASEAN China in 2005 for goods, and then there were services and I think investment chapters added in 2019. So on and so forth with Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and I think that's the way the ASEAN approach works. So what this means is that I think the private sector is aware that trade liberalization takes time. So if what they want at the moment within RCEP is not there, there will be an opportunity to push for greater liberalization through additional rounds of discussion as time goes by. And I think this is where there are some expectations from the private sector that whether it's from the RCEP Joint Committee meetings or for any of the other technical committee that's looking at the different chapters, that perhaps if there was an agenda that would be published prior to the meetings, that would be helpful to the private sector. It allows them to target the meetings and to participate and to provide feedback on the topics that will be discussed. I think across the ASEAN member states, there are varying practices, but I think that would definitely be very useful. A little bit like the ASEAN, like the technical committees on rules of origin, SCARU. For example, those agendas are really useful for the private sector to participate and provide feedback on the difficulties which have been faced.
Thank you so much for that. So lastly, to Mr. Narjoko, you've shared with us your thoughts on the effects of RCEP on global value chains. So, given recent news, I'm curious about what you think is going to be the impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine on global value chains and the regional value chains in Asia. And what do you think would be the role of regional integration, such as RCEP?
This is tough questions. This is very tough questions. I guess, well, the conflict in that other part of the world is still evolving, but I guess the impact will, in terms of trade, I'm not familiar with the trade relationship of its East Asian countries with Ukraine or Russia, but one part will come from that. That's one. Second, I guess impact to this region that been ASEAN East Asia is coming, I guess, more from oil price, the commodity market, and all of this stuff. So it could create something like, commodity sort of shock, and the impact will go through these commodity prices, oil prices, and others. That will actually could impact the macro stability, macroeconomic stability in each of the RCEP members or countries in this region. And it has nothing to do with RCEP, but then it will have some implications with the recovery management, recovery from the COVID, from the pandemic. If the US and others have started to recover, this could be some potential increase in the interest rate. But then many Asian countries or ASEAN countries are still juggling in the recovery, cannot really afford to have a high interest rate. So all of this complexity could come in. But again, uncertainty is still very high. In terms of regional integrations, as I mentioned earlier, the global value chains or international production network is unique to East Asia and ASEAN. That's a very important point. We cannot kind of find the exact copy of this in other part of the world, in the North America or in the South America or in the Europe. So the essence of my guess is on the impact of the Ukraine, Russia on global value chains or regional integration in East Asia and ASEAN, it will have minimal impact. All of the trade relationship, all of this trade between industries, parts, components happen within East Asia and ASEAN, and then the final product is exported. Well, one exported within the East Asia and ASEAN, and then to North America, to other countries. So in terms of manufacturing products and global value chains, I guess the impact is minimal. In fact, the pandemic at the beginning, 2020, has more pronounced impact because suddenly the supply of inputs from China was stopped at the time. A lot of issues in the trade facilitation of the containers, in the ships and everything. That really matters at the time. What we are looking at now, I guess my prediction is it will not be minimal. We will be minimal in terms of impact on global value chains. But Janine, if you now, I hope I answered your question. Just maybe 1 minute on the discussion we just had. I just want to highlight this, maybe furthering the point that Mr. Sokeng, Ibu Dona, and our friends from Deloitte, has mentioned. I guess one point that many observers sometimes quote unquote forget to see is that I guess we cannot see RCEP as a standalone agreement that has just been created. A lot of history, a lot of experiment within ASEAN region actually has contributed to the creation of RCEP. For example, the idea of econ cooperation and MSMEs, technical cooperation. So I guess Ibu Dona mentioned about this, that before the RCEP, if you look at the literature on ASEAN +1, I guess one of the best econ tech chapter was there in ANZ FTA. In fact, IRIA has done a research on this, and we compare the econ-tech chapters or provision across FTA +1, and that was the best, ANZ FTA. And you know what? When was it created, this econ-tech under ANZ FTA? 2009, 2010. 1 decade before RCEP. So actually, the econ-tech under RCEP is very similar in terms of model with the econ-tech under ANZ FTA. And people can say, oh, this RCEP econ-tech is just suddenly be there. No, econ-tech under RCEP came from long history within ASEAN and long experiment actually within ASEAN. So this is sometimes observers forget about this, saying that actually RCEP is the best. I agree with Ibu Dona because it collects all of the best coming from the ASEAN experience. Services, for example, it's been a tug of war within ASEAN whether or not to move from positive to negative leads, right? You know, all of the discussion in the AEC Blueprint 2015 and so on and so forth, ASEAN suddenly realized after 2015 that ASEAN has utilized all of the low-hanging fruits in terms of tariff or services liberalization commitments. So what's next? Because if tariffs is almost zero, what next? The next avenue is trade facilitation. And this is why, again, if you look at the simultaneous agenda within ASEAN, ASEAN Trade Facilitation Group has done a lot of reforms. You know, national single windows, ASEAN single windows was not in the picture 2 decades ago. But Mr. Meng, for example, knows now that almost many ASEAN member states has established already its own national single windows. Again, that happened because of ASEAN reform, ASEAN-led initiative. So when we talk self-certification suddenly came into the picture in RCEP, question is, are ASEAN members able to do it? Well, believe it or not, ASEAN Way has proven that it is possible, although it may take 2 decades, right? So observers often, you know, do not take this into consideration, but this is an important point, I guess. And the second point is, I guess circa around 2011, 2015, observers or policymakers in ASEAN realize they have utilized all of the low-hanging fruit in trade liberalization. What is next? Trade facilitation, investment facilitations, and in this context, all can boils down to what's so-called behind borders reform, right? And this is a homework for ASEAN actually since mid-2000s. And thankfully for ASEAN, APEC process is also reaching ASEAN countries. So all of this behind borders reform, which is one big agenda of APEC, you know, spill over to ASEAN process. And all of this stuff then get into the process. Now, so the way I see it, actually, RCEP is an NCJK as well. Historically, geopolitically, you know, there's always been an effort to have a China, Japan, Korea FTA, but it's, you know, always not successful. But again, in RCEP, now these 3 countries are within one FTA. So that's actually another plus for RCEP, like it or not. So the way I say it, RCEP, I agree, is the best, but it's a collection of the best experience ASEAN experiment has had in the past 3 decades, maybe, since late 1980s. Now, one thing that RCEP was made is because this digital pandemic things. All of the pandemic, or RCEP was signed just before the pandemic. So the essence of e-commerce, digital, the urgency of it has not really come into the pictures. But again, leveraging on the basis of what we learn, that RCEP collects all of the best experiments from the ASEAN, I believe the experiment of this pandemic and digital will eventually come into the RCEP, although from the best, its best features, and for the benefit of all members as well. Okay, sorry to add that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Would anyone like to add anything to that before we move on to the questions from our viewer?
Just would like to give compliment to Donny because he made it very, very correct. I think we are able to, based on our experience, we're able to move up to so confident it must be there for ASEAN. So I think you made it very, very correct. But Donny, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we have a couple of questions from our viewers. I'll just read them out. Thank you for the excellent discussions on RCEP by all the participants. My question is as follows. It is crucial that essential medical goods such as vaccines, protective equipment, test kits, and medical supplies need to move freely and with minimal barriers among ASEAN members for a quick recovery from the pandemic. Does any of the ROO provisions in RCEP make it easier for that to happen compared to the existing ASEAN +1 FTA? Would anyone like to try answering this? I think Pramila wants to answer it.
No, I wonder if I can provide a detailed answer, but if the question is about, is there any specific rules of origin provision about that? I mean, I have not noticed it. I don't think it is there. I think it also depends on the context, I mean, and the timing, as it has been discussed. But and it's not really, I believe it can be, or in the future, treated, but under the trade facilitation provisions, not directly in the rules of origin, because this is quite common. These are provisions, for example, that have been highly discussed in the WCO, the World Customs Organization, at the moment, as they are working on the revised Kyoto Convention. And this is key, in fact. And they obviously, with the pandemic, this has exacerbated the issue. And as we know, I mean, the World Customs, the revised Kyoto Convention is one of the biggest trade agreements, but agreement in the world. And then if ever the review is then implemented, then it will in any case be applicable to all signatory countries. So it could have been discussed in the trade facilitation chapter, but I think it's also covered in other intergovernmental forums and organizations, but it won't be treated under rules of origin. Or normally it's not the case. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, if I may, Janine, I think Pramila made it very correct. I think also this is actually the question already answered some by Pak Doni. So the rules of origin in RCEP, I think, like I said, we have the best agreement under ASEAN +1 FTA is ASEAN Australia New Zealand FTA. So we adopted already previously. This is a full list of PSR, and you see how RCEP ASEAN willing to work with all our partners to have this kind of rules, not only the general rules, but we have the full list of PSR. This is actually already somehow much improved from our previous experience. But once we have the experience with ASEAN Australia New Zealand, then ASEAN somehow quite confident to have this approach. So I think that's how we see. And I think ASEAN, I would say ASEAN is very responsive to the dynamic in our surrounding. During this pandemic, I was still active at that time when we had this and realized the disruption of the connectivity was there. And really, we are working under ASEAN on this self-certification, electronic Form D submission, and we're working on that direction, although we are still having a problem in implementation. But because of this pandemic, we have to work hard and work faster. We don't want to have the connectivity among us, not only among ASEAN. Indonesia, for example, work with Japan, work with China, to ensure that this connectivity disruption because of this pandemic, it has to be somehow resolved. And it worked at that time. I think ASEAN also learned from this experience. That's why I'm quite sure, although I'm not going to be involved anymore in the upgrading session later on for this RCEP, but I'm sure ASEAN and all RCEP member countries will learn from this, and especially ASEAN has already seen how important is this Internet of Things, digital things. I think it will be much easier later on to somehow, the way I see, to upgrade this the chapter of e-commerce. That is how I see. Because of this experience, we know how difficult it is, and especially Indonesia, going to this electronic submission system, because we are, scattered in 83 issuing authorities of Indonesia and also our receiving authorities. We are now connected with this electronic, and we would like to pursue this to our cross-border trade as well. So I think ASEAN, I'm so sure ASEAN will work to this direction. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question from our viewers. How far does the RCEP consider the application of special and differential treatment provisions, given the difference in statuses of members, especially for least developed member states? Would anyone like to take a crack at that?
if I may take this one because I mentioned about kemudian CLM, kemudian Laos and Myanmar. Yes, they are all. Why I say the RCEP is very friendly. It's very good because they able to accommodate something that very worry from the LDC, the three countries they are in the group of RCEP. So you may see even some chapter they even allow us no need to take obligation. So this is a very good sign, and Ibu Dona, as you know very well how hard they able to compromise for certain things. But at the end, they are also the country able to give to these three countries without taking any obligation. Not only one chapter, there are some chapter there, and even have a very long transition period, even some even up to 20 years as well. So this is another good point. And the third point is that they able to provide us more technical assistance, even those capacity building as well. So this is, I just want to sum up because I look at the hour, you have about 1 minute more, so I just short see this like this one. And I would say this is the good sign, even in the future, not only developed country want accession to RCEP, even LDC, if they wish to accession to RCEP, if they may be able to, because they can see that Cambodia, Laos and Myanmar can do, so why not they can do too. And they have also a provision, the provision, the article there that gives some their special still available there. If I'm not mistaken, Ibuna can correct me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So thank you everyone for sending in your questions. And again, I would like to thank our speakers for sharing their insights today. Back to you, Sanchita.
Thank you, Jenina, and thanks to all our panelists. I must say, must be tiring to handle a 1 hour panel discussion, but I know you have enjoyed it thoroughly because all of you are very passionate about the subject, and I can hear that in your voice. So just highlight few of the key takeaways on this 2 hours discussion. Is RCEP is a key milestone for, say, ASEAN regional integration. And as Secretary Sim mentioned, we should not get stuck into whether it's highly ambitious or low ambitious, but we should applaud ASEAN and the other participating countries to give us this comprehensive agreement. At this juncture, we should see the agreement as, say, the glass is half full or 3/4 full, and we should work with the countries to make it a success going forward. Hearing Ibu Dona, I think she's very proud that it's ASEAN-led. And the key for ASEAN is to deliver an agreement that is inclusive in nature, again, and attract investment in the region. And I think that is where ASEAN started its journey in 1990s, that it wanted to increase trade and investment in the region. And of course, there are gaps. We have heard that from all our panelists, but the agreement also offers us the scope for negotiation, further discussion, both between governments and between the government and the private sector to improve it further. And we have seen that in the past with ASEAN-China FTA, where we have seen rounds of negotiation following the agreement coming into effect, and it's a much better agreement now. Listening to Umezaki-san, he presented us on the e-commerce. He said, all the critical component of e-commerce is present in RCEP, but we need to observe the enforcement mechanism. RCEP Secretariat, of course, presents some promising prospect to better implementation. Donnie shared with us that the RCEP is a policy measure and it doesn't exist in vacuum. We need to understand the market mechanism behind it. And the ASEAN region has been showing strong international production network or the global value chain and it's been going on over decades. It's not that it has come just few years back. It's there, I think, for the last 2 or 3 decades. So it's the role of the government to facilitate and strengthen those global value chains in the region, and RCEP is playing that role. And I think this is also further mentioned by Albert during his opening remarks, that RCEP is not just building on the past traditional agreement, but it is increasing, it's showing greater political willingness among the countries to harmonize and streamline rules around the trade and investment. And even Cyn-Young during her presentation showed that 65% of total gains comes from coordination across the regulations in the region. So this part, what I observe is that this part of harmonizing rules, regulations is gaining more importance in the ASEAN trade agreement. And Mengyu or even Pramila also echoed the same issue, like trade in goods has been the backbone of ASEAN integration, but slowly we are seeing the attention is moving to liberalization of the services sector. And that's going to be the next stage of the deeper regional integration and next stage of the ASEAN growth story, or the next driver for the ASEAN growth story. So let me conclude this session here. I must say that this is just a beginning for us to come together and discuss about this RCEP agreement. More is to come from our ADB RCEP knowledge team and our partners. We want the private sector to use the agreement. So we want greater dialogue between the private sector and the government. And of course, ADB will play the role of the honest broker. On this note, let me stop here. Hope to see you all again in our future events and discussion. Have a good evening. Goodbye. Thank you.